The wind didn't just blow across the high plains of Wyoming. It bit. It was a jagged, hungry thing that tore at the eave of the cabin and turned the breath of man into a shroud of white mist. Silas Thorne sat by the hearth, the rhythmic scrape of his whetstone against a hunting knife the only sound against the howling dark. Silas was 55, with a face like a topographical map of a hard-lived life, creased by sun, scarred by the war, and hardened by 15 years of silence on this lonely stretch of dirt. He liked the silence. It didn't ask questions. It didn't bring up the ghost of the Tennessee infantry or the wife he'd buried under the cottonwood tree when the fever took the valley. He had his cattle, his dog, and a shotgun that had never failed him. He thought that was enough. But that night, the dog didn't bark. He whimpered. Silas stood, his knees popping like dry kindling. He moved to the window, wiping a circle in the frost. Out there, where the lantern light died in the swirling snow, a shape was moving. It wasn't a wolf. It was too low, too heavy. It was a person, crawling on hands and knees through the drifts. He didn't hesitate. A man doesn't survive out here by overthinking. He survives by acting. Silas threw on his heavy shearling coat, grabbed his lantern, and stepped into the teeth of the storm. The cold hit him like a physical blow, stealing the air from his lungs. He found her 50 yards from the porch. She was nearly buried. A woman, wrapped in a coat that might have been fine once, but was now a rag of frozen wool. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even shivering anymore. That was the dangerous part. He scooped her up. She was light, dangerously light, like a bird with broken wings. He carried her inside, the heat of the cabin feeling like a furnace after the killing chill of the plains. He laid her down on the rug before the fire. Her face was deathly pale, her lips the color of a mountain lake, but it was her hands that caught his eye. She was wearing elegant black leather gloves, the kind a lady wears to a theater in San Francisco, not the kind a woman wears to survive a Wyoming blizzard. "Easy now," Silas whispered, though she couldn't hear him. "You're off the mountain. You're safe." He began the slow work of thawing a human soul. He built up the fire until the grate glowed orange. He boiled water, the steam rising as he began to peel the leather back. Her eyes snapped open. They weren't blue or brown. They were a startling, haunted gray, like the sky before a thunderstorm. She gasped, a sound of pure, unadulterated terror. She tried to pull away, her voice a thin, dry moan that cracked in the middle. "No, please," she whispered. "I'm not who you think I am." Silas didn't stop. He held her wrist with a hand that was rough but steady. "I don't care who you are, Mississippi, but if I don't get these gloves off, you're going to lose the fingers." He gave a firm, careful tug. The gloves slid off, and Silas Thorne, a man who had seen the worst of what men could do to one another at Shiloh, felt his stomach drop. Silas looked from the brand to her eyes. The terror there was deeper than the cold. He realized then that the blizzard wasn't the most dangerous thing she had been running from. The next 3 days were a slow dance of shadows. Silas moved the woman, Clara, she eventually told him, to the small cot in the corner. He made coffee, bitter, strong, and blacker than a coal mine. It was the only way he knew how to show kindness. Clara didn't speak much. She watched him. Every time he moved toward the door, she flinched. Every time the wind rattled the shutters, she gripped the edge of the wool blanket until her knuckles turned as white as the snow outside. Silas knew that look. It was the look of a hunted animal that had forgotten there was such a thing as a fence. On the second night, while the fire crackled like a heartbeat in the room, Silas sat at the table whittling a piece of cedar. Clara's breath hitched. The silence in the cabin grew heavy, like the air before a landslide. "He doesn't just own the land," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He owns the people on it. He says a brand is the only way to make sure a soul doesn't wander." She looked down at her hand. Silas kept carving. He didn't flinch. He just nodded. "Out here," Silas said, "the law is often just a coat a rich man wears to hide his own filth. But this dirt under our boots, it doesn't care about ledgers. And it doesn't care about brands." Clara looked at him, a flicker of something human buried deep under all that pain. "Why are you helping me? If they find me here, they'll hang you right next to me." Silas stopped carving. He looked at the shotgun leaning against the wall. I walked away from a fight once, Silas said. A long time ago. I let a good man fall because I was tired of the blood. I spent 15 years trying to forget his face. I found out that the only thing heavier than a gun is the weight of not using it when you should have. He stood up and poured her a fresh cup of coffee. Now, Silas said, if you're still listening to this story, you're the kind of person who knows that a man's character isn't built in the sunshine. It's built in the dark when the fire is low. If the story is hitting you in a place you've forgotten was there, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment and tell me what time it is where you are. We're all just travelers on a dark road, and it's good to know who's sitting by the fire with us. Silas spent the morning sharpening his tools. He didn't cut wood. He didn't check the traps. He cleaned his Winchester like it was a holy relic. He knew how this went. Victor Vance was a man of order, and order demanded that things which were lost be returned. Clara tried to help. She washed the dishes with her bandaged hand, her movements careful and deliberate. She was trying to earn her keep, trying to prove she wasn't a burden. Silas wanted to tell her she didn't have to, but he knew that for someone like her, work was the only way back to feeling like a person. Around noon, Silas heard it. The rhythmic thud of hooves on wet earth. Not one horse. 3. He motioned Clara toward the cellar. She didn't argue. She moved with silent efficiency that told Silas she'd been trained by fear for a long time. He closed the trapdoor and slid the rug over it. Silas stepped out onto the porch. He didn't take the shotgun yet. He just stood there, thumbs hooked in his belt, watching the 3 riders come up the ridge. They weren't lawmen. You can tell a lawman by the way he holds his head. These men held their heads like dogs looking for a fight. The man in the middle wore a fancy silk vest under a heavy coat and a mustache that had been waxed to a point. He looked like a banker, but his eyes were as cold as a snake's belly. "Good afternoon, friend," the man said, pulling his horse to a stop. "I'm looking for a stray. A woman stole quite a bit of property from a very important man." Silas spat into the mud. "Only strays I got out here are coyotes. And I usually saw that problem with lead." The man smirked. He didn't look at Silas. He looked at the cabin. He looked at the smoke coming from a chimney. "You're a long way out here, old-timer," the man said. "Must get lonely. A man might get confused about what belongs to him and what belongs to the Iron Judge." "I know exactly what's mine," Silas said, his voice dropping an octave. "This porch, this dirt, and the air you're currently wasting." The man's smirk faded. He shifted in his saddle, his hand drifting toward the pistol at his hip. "We'll be back, Silas Thorne. Victor Vance doesn't like losing his investments, and he's got a very long memory." They turned their horses and rode off, but they didn't go far. They stopped at the edge of the tree line, 3 dark silhouettes against the melting white of the hills. Silas went back inside. He pulled the rug back and opened the trapdoor. Clara climbed out, her face a mask of pale determination. "They'll wait for the dark," she said. "I know," Silas replied. He went to the cupboard and pulled out a box of shells. He started loading the Winchester. The click. Clara walked over to him. She reached out and touched his hand, the rough, callous hand of a rancher. "No," she said. "I'm tired of running. Silas, you told me the dirt doesn't care about brands. Well, I'm ready to stand on my own piece of dirt." Silas looked at her. He saw the girl she had been before the brand, and the woman she had become because of it. He handed her the small nickel-plated revolver he kept in the drawer. "Then aim low," Silas said. "The light plays tricks on you in the dark." The moon was a sliver of bone in the sky when the first lantern light flickered in the trees. Silas had blown out the lamps in the cabin hours ago. He sat in the darkness of the kitchen, the Winchester across his lap. Clara was by the window in the bedroom, her breathing steady. They didn't come with a shout. They came with a torch. A ball of flaming pitch sailed through the air, landing on the drive of the porch. Silas didn't wait. He kicked the door open and fired. The roar of the Winchester filled the night, a flash of orange light illuminating the yard. One of the riders screamed and fell from his saddle. Silas Thorne, a voice yelled from the darkness. It was a man with the mustache. You're dying for a thief. Is she worth your life? Silas didn't answer with words. He fired again, the bullet splintering the hitching post where a second man was trying to take cover. Gunfire erupted from the tree line. Bullets tore through the logs of the cabin, shattering the windows and sending shards of glass flying like diamonds through the dark. Silas felt a hot sting across his shoulder, but he didn't flinch. He'd felt worse in '63. Inside, he heard the sharp crack of the revolver. Clara was holding the back window. The porch was starting to catch fire. The smell of burning pine and wood smoke filled the air. Silas knew they were being flushed out. He looked at the flames, then at the barn. Clara, to the barn. Now! You always did have a knack for picking the wrong neighbors, Silas, Abram said, his voice like grinding gravel. Silas stepped out into the yard. Clara right behind him. He looked at the bodies in the mud, then back at the sheriff. How'd you find us, Abram? The sheriff pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. It was a ledger page. Found a man in town trying to sell some information about Victor Vance's missing gold, Abram said. He had a few pages of a ledger that didn't match the judge's official books. I figure if someone was brave enough to steal the truth from the Iron Judge, they'd eventually end up at the only house in the territory that doesn't take orders from him. Abram looked at Clara. He saw the bandage on her hand. He saw the fire in her eyes. Miss, the sheriff said, tipping his hat, I believe you have some documents the federal circuit judge would be very interested in seeing. Victor Vance has been a tumor on this territory for too long. I think it's time we perform some surgery. The trial took place 3 months later in Cheyenne. Victor Vance sat in the courtroom in his fine black suit, looking every bit the pillar of the community. But when Clara stood up, when she took off her glove and showed the jury the brand on her hand, the room went silent. It wasn't just evidence of crime. It was evidence of a monster. The ledger she had hidden in the lining of her coat did the rest. Vance was led away in irons, his Iron Judge moniker becoming a bitter joke in the newspapers. Silas Thorne didn't stay for the verdict. He didn't like the city. He didn't like the way the air tasted of coal dust and politics. He went back to his ranch. He fixed the porch. He replaced the windows. He sat by the fire and listened to the silence. But the silence was different now. It wasn't empty. A month later, a wagon came up the ridge. Clara was sitting on the bench, wearing a dress of simple blue calico. She didn't have any luggage, just a small bag of seeds and a look of peace that Silas hadn't seen on a... She stepped down from the wagon. She didn't ask permission. She just walked up onto the porch and sat in the chair beside him. The federal judge offered me a job in the city, she said, looking out at the mountains. Did he? Silas asked, kept carving his cedar. I told him I already had a job, Clara said. I told him there was a ranch in high country that needed a better class of bookkeeper, and maybe someone who knows how to plant something other than gray sage. Silas didn't look up, but a tiny smirk touched the corner of his mouth. The soil is hard, Silas said. The winters are long, and the coffee is always bitter. Clara reached over and took his hand. She didn't hide the brand anymore. It was just a scar now, a part of her story, but not the end of it. I've had enough sweet talk to last a lifetime, she said. I think I'll take the bitter coffee. They sat there together as the sun dipped behind the Tetons, turning the sky into a sea of purple and gold. Two broken people, found in the storm, building something whole out of the wreckage. Because out here in the West, stories don't end with a brand. They end with the land. And the land always remembers who stood their ground. If you've stayed with me this far, I want to thank you. These stories of the Old West are more than just tales of gunfights and gold. They're stories about the human spirit, about the choices we make when the world tries to break us. If you believe that every scar is just a map to a better version of yourself, then you belong here with us. Hit that like button if Silas and Clara's journey meant something to you. Share this with someone who needs to know they aren't alone in their storm. And don't forget to subscribe. We have many more trails to ride together. Until the next sunrise, take care of yourselves and take care of each other. The West is big, but it's a whole lot smaller when you're riding with friends.